Archie sat quietly in the corner of his kennel, his golden brown fur slightly matted from months of lying on the same thin blanket. The constant chatter of shelter visitors and the excited barks of younger dogs filled the air, but he didn't bother getting up. He had learned long ago that people didn't stop for dogs like him. Puppies would get chosen first, their tiny tails wagging furiously as they were carried away into loving arms. The purebred dogs with their striking coats and pedigrees were the next to go, their new owners beaming with pride. But Archie? He was just a 6-year-old mutt, ordinary, quiet, and overlooked. He hadn't always been alone. Once, he had a warm home, a soft bed, and a kind old man who would scratch behind his ears every night before they fell asleep. But one day, everything changed. Archie's owner fell ill, and soon, strangers in uniforms arrived. They spoke in hushed tones, patted Archie's head reassuringly, and then took his human away. Archie had waited by the door for days, expecting him to return. But he never did. Instead, the door opened one final time, and Archie was led outside, placed in a car, and brought to the shelter. At first, he had hope. Every time someone passed by his kennel, he would sit up, wag his tail, and press his nose against the bars, waiting for someone to see him. But days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. He watched as new dogs arrived and left, while he remained in the same place, growing more invisible with each passing day. Eventually, he stopped trying. He no longer ran to greet visitors. He no longer wagged his tail when a shelter worker passed by. He simply curled up in his corner and waited for time to pass. The shelter staff adored Archie, always giving him extra pats and sneaking him treats when they could. "Your turn will come, buddy," one of them, a kind woman named Lisa, would say as she knelt beside his kennel. But Archie wasn't sure he believed that anymore. He had seen too many families walk past him without a second glance. He had stopped dreaming about a forever home. One particularly busy Saturday, the shelter was filled with families searching for new pets. Children squealed with excitement as they played with the puppies, and adults discussed which dog would best fit their home. Archie stayed in his corner, resting his head on his paws, knowing that today would be just like all the others. But then, something different happened. A pair of small hands gripped the bars of his kennel. "Mom," a soft voice said, full of curiosity, "why is this dog all alone?" Archie lifted his head. His eyes met the wide, wondering gaze of a little girl. And for the first time in a long time, hope flickered in his heart. Emma's fingers curled around the cold metal bars of the kennel as she stared at the quiet dog inside. Unlike the others, who jumped and barked excitedly whenever someone approached, this one simply lay in the corner, watching the world with sad, tired eyes. His fur was golden brown, though a little unkempt, and his ears drooped slightly as if he had long given up on hoping for anything better. "Mom," Emma said again, tugging at her mother's sleeve. "Why is he all alone?" Her mother knelt beside her, reading the small sign attached to the kennel. "His name is Archie," she said softly. "It looks like he's been here for a long time." Emma turned back to the dog. "How long?" Before her mother could answer, a shelter worker overheard the conversation and approached with a warm smile. "Almost a year," she said, crouching down beside them. "Archie's a great dog, sweet, gentle, and well-behaved. But people usually want younger dogs." Emma's brows furrowed. "Why?" The worker hesitated, then sighed. "Well, puppies are easier to train, and they have their whole lives ahead of them. Older dogs like Archie, sometimes people think they're too much trouble." Emma didn't say anything for a moment. She just looked at Archie, who had finally lifted his head to gaze back at her. His brown eyes were deep and full of something Emma couldn't quite explain. Something old, something heavy. But underneath all of that, she saw something else. A tiny flicker of hope, as if he was afraid to believe that someone might finally see him. "Can I meet him?" she asked. Her parents exchanged a look. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" her dad asked. "There are a lot of puppies here. Maybe you should meet a few others first." Emma shook her head. "I want to meet Archie." The shelter worker smiled and unlocked the kennel door. Archie stood slowly, stretching his legs as he took a hesitant step forward. Emma held out her hand, palm up, just like she had seen people do in movies. "Hi, Archie," she whispered. For a moment he just stood there, staring at her as if trying to decide whether or not she was real. Then, cautiously, he took a step closer. His nose brushed her fingertips, warm and damp, and Emma felt the soft tickle of his breath. Then, to everyone's surprise, Archie leaned in, resting his head gently against her small hand. Emma beamed. "I think he likes me." Her mother smiled softly. "I think he does too." Emma turned to her parents, determination shining in her eyes. "I want to take him home." Archie's ears perked up slightly. It was as if, for the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his waiting was finally over. Archie sat stiffly in the back seat of the car, his body tense as the vehicle rumbled beneath him. His leash was looped loosely around Emma's small hand, but she didn't tug or pull. She simply sat beside him, whispering soft words he didn't quite understand. "You're gonna love it at our house, Archie. We have a big backyard, and I'll give you my comfiest blanket. And my mom makes the best peanut butter treats." Archie didn't move. He had been in cars before, but the last time had taken him away from the only home he had ever known. This time, he didn't know where he was going, and a small part of him worried that this, too, would end in disappointment. When the car finally stopped, Emma unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to him. "Come on, Art. We're home." The word made Archie's ears twitch, but he still hesitated as the car door opened. He looked up at Emma, uncertain, but she just smiled and patted her lap. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're safe." Slowly, Archie stepped out of the car. The scent of fresh grass and something warm and familiar, maybe cookies, filled the air. He sniffed cautiously, taking in the surroundings. The house in front of him had a bright red door, a small porch, and a flower bed bursting with color. The yard was open and inviting, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves of a tree in the corner. It wasn't like his old home, but something about it felt gentle. Emma's parents led the way inside, and Archie followed hesitantly. His paws pressed against the wooden floor, the sound unfamiliar but not unpleasant. The house smelled like cinnamon and something sweet, and there were cozy blankets draped over the couches. Everything was warm. Everything was soft. Everything was different from the cold, sterile walls of the shelter. Emma crouched down and pulled out a fluffy dog bed, placing it near the couch. "This is for you," she said, patting it. "And look, I got you some toys." She reached into a small basket and pulled out a stuffed bunny, holding it out for him. Archie stared at the bunny, then at the bed. He didn't move. He wasn't sure if he was allowed to. Emma seemed to sense his hesitation. She placed the toy down gently and then, to everyone's surprise, unrolled a sleeping bag next to his bed. "I'm staying with you tonight," she announced. Her parents chuckled. "Are you sure?" her dad asked. "Your bed is a lot more comfortable than the floor." Emma nodded firmly. "He might be scared. I don't want him to feel alone." Archie watched as Emma curled up beside him, her tiny hand reaching out to rest on his paw. He looked at her, then at the quiet house around him. He still didn't know if this was real, but for the first time in a long time, he felt something he thought he had forgotten. As the night stretched on, Archie let out a slow, deep breath, closed his eyes, and for the first time in forever he slept peacefully. The morning light streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow across the living room floor. Archie stirred, blinking sleepily as he stretched his legs. For a moment he panicked. Where was he? The scent of metal cages and disinfectant was gone. Instead, the air smelled like pancakes and something sweet. Then he remembered. The little girl. The warm blankets. The gentle hand resting on his paw. Archie turned his head to see Emma still curled up in her sleeping bag, her face peaceful in the early morning quiet. He studied her for a moment, as if trying to understand why she had stayed beside him all night. No one had ever done that for him before. No one had ever cared enough to make sure he wasn't alone. Carefully, he shifted his weight and laid his head near hers. He had spent so long in the shelter, convinced that no one wanted him. But now, as he listened to the slow, steady rhythm of Emma's breathing, something inside him softened. Maybe he really did belong here. A soft knock on the doorframe made his ears perk up. Emma's mom stood there, smiling gently. "Good morning, buddy," she whispered. "Come get some breakfast?" Archie hesitated, looking back at Emma. But as if sensing his movement, she stirred, stretching her arms with a sleepy yawn. When she opened her eyes and saw him watching her, she grinned. "Good morning, Archie." He wagged his tail, hesitantly at first, but when she reached out and ruffled his ears, it wagged a little faster. "Come on," she said, standing up and offering her hand. "Let's go eat." This time, Archie didn't hesitate. He followed her into the kitchen, where the smell of pancakes filled the air. A small bowl of food was already waiting for him near the back door. He patted over, sniffed it cautiously, then looked back at Emma. She nodded encouragingly. "It's all yours," she said. "Forever." That word again. Forever. Archie took a bite. It wasn't just food, it was a promise. A promise that he would never be left behind again. A promise that he was finally home. Over the next few weeks, Archie learned what it truly meant to be part of a family. He explored the backyard, feeling the grass under his paws as he chased after Emma, their laughter and barks echoing through the air. He curled up on the couch, his head resting on her lap as she read stories to him at night. He learned to trust, to love, to believe that this life was really his. And one evening, as Emma wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered, "I told you I'd come for you," Archie knew. He wasn't waiting anymore. He had found his forever home.